Hello, and thank you for your interest in the Patient Engagement in Clinical Trials, Patient, Industry, and Clinical Investigator Perspectives report, created by MDIC's Science of Patient Input Initiative. MDIC is a public-private partnership created with the sole objective of advancing regulatory science of medical devices for patient benefit through multiple pre-competitive regulatory science projects. MDIC's Science of Patient Input Initiative received a BAA from FDA to develop a framework for patient input in medical device clinical trials. As part of this effort, the Science of Patient Input Initiative has produced this report combining 3 surveys from patients, device manufacturers, and clinical investigators. It details their perspectives on patient engagement within clinical research. Using the information gathered and presented within this report, MDIC will later be releasing a report called Maximizing Patient Input in the Design and Development of Medical Device Clinical Trials, which will provide a concise set of considerations for medical device developers to evaluate as they pursue patient engagement in their clinical trials and product development activities. This combined surveys report is important to our community as it takes the first steps in evaluating the current practices and perspectives of these 3 important stakeholder groups: device manufacturers, clinical investigators, and patients. It then can provide important contributions to the evidence-based supporting efforts that leverage their opportunity to engage patients to help create better and more successful clinical trials. To talk more about this work, I am joined today by Mike Otluski, our working group chair, and Wendy Seelig, our consultant that helped us throughout the development of this report. Mike?
Thank you, Marlene. It was a pleasure to work with an excellent working group developing and conducting these surveys. They did a great job, I think. We first reached out to patient groups and asked them to invite their members to participate in a survey about clinical trials. The patients were asked about their personal experiences, if any, with trials, their feelings about the importance of clinical research, and what aspects of trials would make them more or less willing to take part. They were also asked what ways patients could participate in the design of clinical studies to make them more relevant to patients. We received 124 responses in a 3-month period. As we can see from the slide, some key takeaways from the patient responses were patients responded that the strongest motivators for participating in clinical trials are access to new treatments, but also the chance to contribute to the body of knowledge that may benefit others in the future, so that altruistic motive. The patients who had participated in clinical trials felt that they generally had positive experiences. They would also be interested in direct contact with trial sponsors during the trials, and in receiving trial updates regularly and a summary of the results once the trial was complete. Patients had a strong interest in helping sponsors design better trials, even talking to other patients about the importance of clinical research, or even meeting with regulators to discuss patient preferences. Next, we surveyed members of industry who are involved in clinical trials at their respective companies in order to get a sense of the current attitudes toward patient input into clinical trial design and planning, and the extent to which they're involving patients throughout the research process already. We received 53 responses over a 2-month period for that one. And based on the survey responses, some key considerations from industry members were few companies are actively involving patients in the design of clinical studies or in the operational planning of the studies after the study protocols are final. More so than cost or even extended timelines, the perceived barriers to obtaining patient input were concerns about patient privacy, the challenges of identifying those patient partners, and then finding the appropriate methods to elicit useful feedback from the patients. Companies have interest in the idea and they believe patient input would lead to better engagement in clinical trials. They just don't know where to start, which is exactly where the MDIC framework comes in. Now, Wendy, please tell us about the survey of the clinical trial investigators.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Marlene. It's been my pleasure to be involved with this important work. So for the 3rd survey for the investigators, we chose to reach out to those that have received funding from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI. The reason that we chose PCORI funded investigators is because all PCORI grants require engagement of patients as part of their projects. We therefore assume that those investigators would be well-versed and experienced in this type of engagement and could provide us important insights about the benefits, challenges, and learnings of patient engagement in device clinical studies. Of the 33 investigators we contacted, we had full responses on our online survey from 7, and 5 of those provided in-depth follow-up interviews. Though we would have liked to have heard from more, given the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic at about the same time, we opted to work with the feedback that we had received. Key considerations for investigators of device studies from the survey and interviews included the following. It is important to be flexible and accept the input received from patients as you're working through developing your clinical trial. It's also important that you have the commitment of your study leadership for this process. There is also a need to recognize that successful patient engagement can take time. Finding the right patients and patient advocates to be appropriate partners in this work requires working with patient advocacy organizations. It also requires tapping into diverse populations across demographics and considering a range of experiences and perspectives. Additionally, it's important to conduct thoughtful vetting of those that you might select to be your partners. It's necessary to provide education and training to ensure that the patients you select to be your partners can fully contribute to your process. And finally, it's really important to ensure there's consistent communication with your patient partners, including conducting regular meetings and providing a feedback loop so that they can see how their input ultimately played out in the trial. As the next slide shows, we were really happy to see that with the investigators we talked to, input from their patient partners had played a part in informing or even leading to changes in some of the elements of their trial design and protocol. For example, there was significant impact from feedback from patients on how inclusion and exclusion criteria, endpoints, and patient recruitment strategies were designed. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Marlene.
Thank you so much, Wendy and Mike. You both have been instrumental in the development of this work. Could you walk us through, what you think the next steps are here and some conclusions or important things you found throughout the development of this report? Mike, I'll hand it off to you first.
Yeah, looking at the 3 surveys together, I think there are clear opportunities for involving patients in the design of device clinical studies and engaging them throughout the development process. And there's definite interest from patients in doing so and participating in that way. The 3 surveys combined provide an important snapshot of the current best practices, challenges, and some resource gaps for advancing engagement of patients in medical device clinical studies for the medical device field.
So from my perspective, I'd say one of the things that's important for device manufacturers to know is that we can learn a great deal from what's already been going on the drug development side. Although it is important to recognize that there are unique aspects of medical device development, including the heterogeneity of the patient population for many devices and the importance of special considerations when you're dealing with implantable devices that are not the same as in a drug arena. I'd also say there are opportunities for this field to conduct some additional work, illuminating ongoing progress in this area and developing training resources for patients to help prepare them to be good partners. In my mind, the medical device field should continue this work, prioritizing advancing the science of patient input and engaging patients in planning and executing clinical studies. Thank you so much for involving me in this effort, and I'll turn it back to you, Marlene.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wendy and Mike. We would also like to take a moment to thank our steering committee and working group members who worked very hard on developing this first step into understanding how we should be incorporating patient input to the development of medical device clinical trials. So with that, please feel free to visit our website, mdic.org, or contact us directly at spi@mdic.org to learn more about our initiative and to keep up to date with the more work that we are producing from this framework. Thank you.